Tracee Ellis Ross was recently a guest on the In My Opinion podcast that Michelle Obama and her brother Craig Robinson host. And she had a very great conversation about dating, and they offered some advice, and she offered a lot about her life that a lot of people have a lot to say about it. So let's talk about it.
We're about to voice it with friend love one.
Tune in. Welcome to Voice It with Fran Lavoie, and I'm your host, Fran Lavoie. I took a little hiatus, but I'm back, and I am happy to be here to discuss a topic that is near and dear to me because so often women who are single after a certain age, women who are childless after a certain age, appear to just fall apart or seem to be left behind by society, whether society left them a long time ago, which is very much true, whether they allowed society to leave them behind, or a mixture of both. For those of you who don't know, Tracee Ellis Ross is the daughter of the famous Diana Ross, who is a singer and just superstar pop singer. Tracee, who is 52 years old, has made a name for herself in Hollywood as an actress, comedian, and prior to that, she was a model, and she is an award-winning actress. She has been notoriously single for a long time and has never been married, no children, and she came on the Michelle Obama and Craig Robinson podcast, and they were discussing dating. And I thought that this podcast in general was very eye-opening and good for us to look into Tracee Ellis Ross's life, but also her insights. And there were a lot of things that she said that people took either issue with, interest, or they just simply had their think pieces and commentary to it. So as I watched, I noticed that I was watching clips and I said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And shout out to the MVMO podcast, My View, My Opinion. You can check that out on YouTube as well. And, you know, she mentioned something that I try to hold principle to also, and that is never, ever, ever, excuse me if you hear a lot of shuffling around. I'm at home just doing things as I do this. Never, ever, ever watch something in clips and then assume that you know the full context. And in general, we shouldn't be doing that anyway. We shouldn't just be like, well, I'm going to just go off of this 5-minute clip or even less, 30-second clip that doesn't really tell us anything. All it does is just solidify our biases that we make into fact. And opinions are not fact. You know, the only thing that we can do is go off of what people say. And so I decided before I even listened to the rest of MVMO's views on it, I just decided to watch it for myself. And I'm glad that they have the podcast in video and audio form. So I watched the video version on YouTube. And I was very pleased because I was able to see her facial expressions. You know, I like that. You know, conversations are verbal, but also nonverbal at the same time. And I just wanted to see. So I have my takeaways from it, and I'm definitely going to share. Before they brought Tracee out, Craig and Michelle were just being candid on their dating life before getting married. And Craig had been married and divorced, and they discussed something that was really important. They both grew up, you know, in the same house, same parents, and Craig pretty much spoke about him being shy and him being the quote-unquote quintessential nice guy, and that making it hard for him to approach girls, not to mention him being at an all-boys school. And Michelle, he joked that Michelle, and she agreed that she had dated a lot of the JV basketball players that, were playing at his school, because Craig is a basketball player, and I think he plays, or he coached college basketball, if not still. And they also spoke about the differences in how they managed their relationships. Craig did things pretty traditional to what his parents had done, a format of, we're going to go to school, get a degree, start making money, have some sort of a single life for a period of time, get married. And he mentioned a lot of his friends, including himself, that did that formula, they all divorced their first wives, or they, just got divorced, not necessarily who divorced who. But it is a testament to sometimes, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further with Tracee, the choiceability in, you have a choice to not go that way or not to follow that formula. And also being young, it's implied that Craig got married really young, following this quintessential formula that a lot of people in the silent year generation, that generation from the 40s and before, that age group, they just got married for several reasons that didn't also necessarily mean that they had much choices or options. They might have, but these days we have a lot more of a choice. But, when you're talking to Michelle, and Michelle was speaking, Michelle started to speak about how she didn't necessarily want to do things the way that her parents did them. And, as a result, she married Barack, and, they had a nice candid conversation on how Craig and Barack connected over basketball, and how Craig said that you can tell a lot about a man based on how he plays ball, and, just joking on that. But my takeaway from that was, wow, a lot of people do things traditionally, not because that's how they want to do things, but because they saw probably a success rate in that. The Robinsons, that's Michelle's maiden name. Their parents were married, I believe, up until her father passed away, I believe, in the late 80s or early 90s. And so it seemed to work. There was a functional two-parent household that they grew up in. And so it appeared to work. So it makes sense, logical, to do what you saw. But it didn't mean that the relationship wasn't without its troubles. And it also didn't mean that what happened in that generation could suffice in the generation that they were in and beyond. So he has remarried, but he spoke about how he had like over 30 questions to ask his, then girlfriend, now wife. And she had only 3, and they were categorical, where he just had questions. And she was able to deduce that, well, my categories pretty much fit all the questions that you have. Like all the questions that you have fit in all my 3 categories. And as we go along, we'll piggyback on a part of Craig's experience with his wife and getting to know her and courting her that Tracee and Michelle were able to chime in on. And that's about choiceability and the ability to allow your partner to shine and be who they are without intimidation. It's one of the questions that his now wife asked, and they're happily married. And Michelle has been very candid about the ups and downs in her relationship. If you read her memoir, Becoming, she's very open about that. And I'm grateful for that because, you know, it's important for us to not see these high profile, amazing marriages and assume that all is well, because it very well just might not be. So they continued to talk about some other things, but then they started to bring Tracee Ellis Ross on. And when she came on, you know, she's always fashion forward. I didn't necessarily understand her outfit per se, but everything that she wore from her head to her toes, I could see me wearing it, but just pairing it differently. But that's just like the fashion person in me, or the eye that I had for it. But, you know, once again, you can look at that and you can agree with me or disagree. But let's get into the meat of the podcast and what they were talking about with Tracee. All right. So she said a lot of things, and they spoke about how she felt like family, and, you know, getting to the nitty gritty of what everybody has been talking about is her stating that she dates younger men because a lot of men that are her age range have grown up under the tutelage of toxic masculinity. So Tracee Ellis Ross is 52. She was born in October of 1972, which would make her a Gen Xer. And being an early millennial myself, I have dated Gen Xers myself, who are men. And I would say that it is true depending on the person, but we can't speak to Tracee Ellis Ross's experience. Her experience is that she has experienced men that happen to be in her age range that have this trait more often than not. She did state that she dated some great guys, but she just wasn't romantically interested, or she just hadn't had luck. And a lot of the men that she had dated pretty much have often had to have the same amount to lose as she did, which is fair. And we can talk about dating up or down in another conversation. But with Tracee mentioning that she would date, or she tends to date younger men because they're a little bit more malleable mentally to the idea of healthy masculinity, which is, you know, very subjective on what healthy masculinity is, but also has a lot of objectivity to it, in the sense that, you know, there is an understanding of, you know, women being equal to men, and men understanding that there is not necessarily a gender role, just as much as women don't understand that. And men really understanding women to be in a certain equality means that there are no questions or insecurities about finance. There are no insecurities about power and the struggles that may come with that. So, you know, these are just things that are thrown out. I'm not saying that that is the definition. However, those are some of the things and some of the main focal points that tends to get us into a place of conflict when it comes to dating, particularly a woman of her stature, who is a award-winning actress, who has been in the limelight for a long time, and who happens to be the daughter of a pop icon. It's definitely, I would think, very intimidating to date a woman like Tracee Ellis Ross. So when she said that younger men are on her roster, a lot of people had things to say. You can go on the Shade Room, the Neighborhood Talk, and people was going off. You could go on Twitter, and a lot of people just felt like it was a double standard, that men doing that would never be okay. And when men would be demonized for doing such a thing. And it is a double standard, absolutely. Because I think when men do it, it comes off like they are creeps. And women doing it, I think it can also come off creepy too. But if, you know, both are consenting adults and there's a choice and it doesn't look predatory on both ends, I don't see the problem with it. For me personally, I would not want to date someone that is much younger than I. And that's just speaking for me because I would like to have a person who has the more or less the same insights I have as a result to generational closeness. Like if I want to talk to you about the Spice Girls in 1996, and then I want to talk to you about, you know, R&B and hip hop in the 90s, because I thoroughly experienced that, and we can't talk about that. I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, but I'd always feel like, what are we to talk about on a reminiscent depth level? And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes with age comes a level of maturity. So unless the gentleman that or the gentleman that she's speaking with, and any woman or any man, unless the person that you're speaking with comes with a level of maturity that matches yours, oftentimes that old adage, with age comes wisdom and experience comes understanding, definitely applies often more than not. And sometimes you're just not trying to teach people certain things that you've gone through the growing pains of. And oftentimes people around your age, tend to have gone through those things too. Now, a huge disclaimer, doesn't mean that somebody who's my age, pushing 40, is as mature as I am. It doesn't mean that I've arrived in maturity. I'm not saying that. More so than what I'm saying, a lot of people looked at what Tracee said and was like, you just got these men on a roster and you having fun with them. Can you really take them serious? And you never know. It's how young we talking. Maybe she's just trying to cut a rug, There's a lot to unpack, but the toxic masculinity focal point in her generation of Gen X, tended to start to dissipate. I'm a millennial, like I said. I deal with some millennials, and some of my female and guy friends who have the same mentalities because we were raised by baby boomers. But as we go deeper and deeper, and as we grow, you notice that the younger generations seem to be more progressive and forward thinking, and it just appears that Tracee's looking for that. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Some people think that it's a form of manipulation, so she can just mold these men into what she wants them to be. And I just see it as her preference, and these younger men seem to be giving it. So that's just my thoughts on that, but let's move on. Now, as they moved on, they went into other topics, the men that she had dated in the past and how she had made decisions on who to date and what not to date. And to not make this very long, to piggyback on what Craig Robinson had asked his wife, and what his wife actually asked him was pretty much, if she was in a relationship with him, would he be okay with her standing alone and being okay with the fact that she could stand alone? And that is a very important topic in today's world, because in past societies, women really needed men more often than not, unless they were in a position of power that had been passed down to them. More often than not, women were getting married for the sake of building families, and they needed the men that they were married to for financial stability, for, family building, legacy. And in today's world, a lot of women don't need men. And as a matter of fact, women are more educated than what they once were. are running businesses, are CEOs, they have high positions, and financially, they really don't need men, like I just said. So it doesn't mean that they don't want men, they just don't need them. So if a woman is powerful all in herself, even if she does not have the financial prowess, let's say this woman is just a powerful woman, and when she walks into a room, she doesn't need an introduction. She's that kind of girl, that kind of woman. Is that man okay with that power that she comes with? And unfortunately, tying into the toxic masculinity conversation that Tracee Ellis Ross was speaking on, a lot of men don't seem to be able to do that. Some men, I've met plenty of men, actually, not to say some, that don't mind their women shining and that don't mind their women being their own individual bosses on their own. But it does hold an issue with some men, and might I dare say with some women, because some women do have issues with their spouses being larger than life as well. And for me, that is an important conversation to have, because oftentimes we just want to be loved no matter what our status is financially, no matter what our reputation is and what that comes with. We just want the love. And when you are in a situation with someone who is not expecting that from your reach, your ability to just, don't worry, I got it, or no, I'm cool. You don't necessarily need them to support you in certain areas. Like kind of like what they said. It's like if we're walking down the red carpet, I might not need you in my picture. I'm good. I'm gonna take my own photo. And sometimes that might be a sting to the ego on both counterparts, male or female. And you just have to make sure that you're with someone who is 100% comfortable with you being who you are, and vice versa. And I think that that's an important topic to bring up. Now, part of the podcast that I appreciated is them taking a question and answering it from their perspective. And it was a gentleman that was speaking about how he'd had difficulty dating. And even though it wasn't hard for him to find a person, it was hard for him to land connection. And the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway is chemistry does not equal love, or at least long-lasting love. And Tracee was speaking on how she both wanted the chemistry and the long-lasting love and all the elements that come with it. But chemistry alone is not the answer to something that's long-lasting, because I don't know anyone who's listening to this. I don't know your background relationally, but having chemistry tends to fizzle out because it's a fire, and it can dissipate if it's not supported by something that can keep that fire burning. And like Tracee, I am guilty of wanting the same thing. I want both. I want the stability of love that comes with the fire and connection. But I'm also wise enough to know that if all I have is chemistry that outweighs the stability, it will not last. And, I think that so often we make the mistake of trying to look for that spark. And while that spark is extremely important, don't get me wrong, I think that you have to be attracted to the person. I think that you have to have compatibility. I think that your differences have to work well together in order to make it work. But I also believe that without, financial stewardship, without the same goals, without being able to meet one another, even if you don't agree with something, meeting in the middle with things. Those are just a few important things that I've heard over the years from a lot of my married friends, going to marriage conferences, all these things, listening into psychologists and, biblical counsel when it comes to marriage. That level of stability and those things that aren't necessarily so sexy, those are the important things. If I'm broke, are you going to pick up 2 jobs? If I can't find a job, not necessarily if I'm broke, but if I lost my job and I'm over here looking, do we know how to save money? Did we understand the fundamentals of saving? Is the person a spendthrift? They might be sexy and fine, and you have wonderful conversations as all get out, but are they stable within themselves? Are they secure? And do they make your life better in the sense that you are able to reciprocate the same because they make it easy? They make your life just a touch easier than what it once was. And I'm not saying that, in life, you're supposed to find someone that just makes your life easy just for the sake of that. But it's important to be with someone who wants to provide for you and someone who wants to nurture and care for you and someone who wants to build and grow with you, not just having intense passion, not just having intense chemistry and attraction alone can make a relationship suffice. And it must be reciprocated. I can't get from a man what I cannot give him and vice versa. If a person is smart, they'll walk away from someone who is all about that fire and spice, but doesn't make them feel secure in the relationship, doesn't make them feel secure financially, doesn't make them feel secure when it comes to, putting the building blocks together. All those things matter, and it must be reciprocated. I'm not saying that a woman and a man have to match in every single way because you're not going to get everything. But I do believe that in a lot of ways there has to be a whole person coming together with a whole person who understands themselves, who is willing to be accountable, who's willing to admit when they're wrong, who's willing to, build upon themselves and is willing to not necessarily sacrifice who they are, but compromise things that may not necessarily benefit the relationship and vice versa in order for this team to work. And when I say compromise, a lot of people don't know the difference between, and for me, sacrificing yourself is kind of like you putting a stake in your heart or just cutting off a piece of who you are to make this relationship work. And I don't like that. But compromise is more so, I'm not going to let this part of me go, but I will, put a lid on it, in these situations. Or I will, instead of doing what I want to do in this situation, I'm going to do what is best for the both of us or for the best sake of the family. It's not about you losing you. It's about you coming together with a person to make a relationship work where the both of you benefit and the family benefits in the long run. So, that's just my opinion on it. And I love that she said that about the chemistry because too often, and I've made this mistake, where I have gone for either or, where, I was looking for stability, not necessarily because I wanted somebody to pay my bills because, I am a dual professional. I don't necessarily need a man for money per se. When I say stability, I meant this person makes me feel like I'm wanted. This person makes me feel like they are willing to build with me. This person makes me feel and is showing, not just feel, but just showing the signs of, I want to grow with Fran and I want to do all the things, so that we are able to build a long lasting relationship. But I wasn't attracted to them. I didn't feel that spark. And so I tended to, go along with it until the person realized, you know what, like, I don't think that you want me like that. And it would hurt me because I felt like, well, I really liked them. I really cared. So I did not, want those relationships to end. And then on the flip, I've experienced intense chemistry, intense desire and want just for the person to be, emotionally unstable. The person, having multiple options and, basking in those options and, being carefree to the point where it wasn't about us more than it was about how this person could advance in themselves. And I had to look within myself and realize, were there things in my life that was attracting these type of people? And was I doing the same thing in return to others? And so even though I don't believe I was, because I definitely asked like, hey, was I this way? Was I that way? Character development and just incompatibility and often insecurity, when it came to certain men in my life, were part of the reasons why things did not work. And when I look at myself, I could look at things that, I could have done this better. I could have said this better. And I definitely know that I played a role in why things didn't work on my end too. But those are the things that you have to look within and see. Why are my relationships not working? What is going on with me? In the book of Matthew, in the Bible, I don't know if you all or whoever's listening are believers in the Holy Scriptures, but it tells you to look at the plank in your eye before you look in someone's speck. That person from afar might have a plank in their eye, but it looks like a little tiny speck from your perspective. If you're trying to look into their eye, you have to really dig deep to determine, but you got a whole plank that's crowding your view. And you have to chop that down. And that is called accountability and dealing with you and figuring out you. And I think that's part of the compromise. That's not so sexy, It's not the fiery chemistry where this person just looks good, smells good, feels good, everything is good. But it is I have a lot of work to do here, and this person's holding me accountable. I want to do this and I want to do that, but this person's holding me accountable to say, stop where I need to stop, and go where I need to go, and wait where I need to wait. And that's just the bottom line. I think that when we're looking for love and a lasting relationship, what she said about chemistry not being love is so important and is a lesson that I think many people will learn, that if they learn it early, they won't be single, or they will give the person that they were kind of keeping on the, back burner or just as a friend a chance, or, you can at least reflect on areas where you may have jumped the gun on a relationship, or maybe you've been jumped over, and don't let go of those standards of, this is what I'm looking for. And even if those people aren't looking for it when it comes to me, you remain someone who is secure and stable, and you continue to learn about yourself and grow, so that a person that appreciates you and wants to build and grow with you and wants to reciprocate what you're giving in their special way, just like you're giving in your special way, will find all that they need in you, and you'll find all that you need in them. So that's that for my thoughts on this. Please drop down in the comments and let me know what you think about this discourse. And be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I moved my content from my Friend Love Watch channel over to this channel. So thank you for your support, and I am excited to watch this grow. So let's drop down in the comments and let's talk about it. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the comments and continue to talk more. Bye, guys. I hope you have a great one. Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Fran Lavoie. Thank you so much for listening to this video and watching it. Now, if you like this one, there's plenty others where that came from. Be sure to check out my channel, like, comment,